Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about why real Nintendo Switch 2 news may be about to happen. So when I say real Nintendo Switch 2 news, I mean official word from Nintendo themselves. Some sort of PR statement, perhaps an official tweet, maybe even something bigger like a reveal trailer or a presentation. Am I expecting something so substantial as a reveal trailer or a presentation at this point in time? Not really, but it is still possible, and we'll talk more about the possibilities a little bit later into the video. What we're first going to focus on though is why official news may be about to happen, and in short, it's because Nintendo's shareholder meeting is about to happen on Tuesday, November 5th. Some of you might be wondering, why would we be getting official news at this shareholders meeting? Sure, shareholders meetings always give us updates on Nintendo's financials for at least the last 3 months. But there is also a history of more significant news happening during these points in time. So for example, going back to May 7th, we got the financial results briefing for the fiscal year ending March 2024. And on this day, May 7th, Nintendo put out this tweet. Some of you may remember that President Furukawa himself put out this message announcing that there will be details about the successor to the Nintendo Switch happening within the fiscal year. This was 6 months ago. And so since this has happened, every time we've gotten some sort of official presentation from Nintendo, they've had to make mention of the Switch successor. So for example, when we got this tweet from Nintendo about the Museum Direct, they also had to follow up and say, please note that there will be no game announcements or mention of the Nintendo Switch successor during this presentation. It's kind of laughable that they felt compelled to make mention that there will be no mention of the Switch successor, the Switch 2, during a direct about the museum. But they've had to make some sort of clarification about the Switch successor for every single presentation since May 7th. But some of you might be saying, okay, sure, for the shareholders meeting for the end of an entire fiscal year, Nintendo felt it was worth mentioning the Switch successor. But that doesn't mean that they're going to do it for just the 6-month earnings release. It's not as important. I would say that that's arguable that it's not as important. But there is also precedent for major news to happen for the 6-month earnings release. Just last year, when we had the equivalent to this event, Nintendo announced the live-action Legend of Zelda movie. So they do still sometimes make big announcements during the shareholders meetings at the end of the calendar year. And we do still have this mysterious tweet from industry analyst Dr. Serkan Toto, where he just said, quote, Switch 2, quote. Many people don't want to make much of this, but I always like to point out that whenever we've gotten a cryptic tweet from Dr. Serkan Toto, which is not very often, this is the 3rd time that we have record of, it has amounted to something official from Nintendo within the next few weeks. And so even though we haven't gotten any official word from Nintendo yet about Switch 2, I think there's a pretty good chance we may get some word from Nintendo about Switch 2 at the shareholders meeting. I will also point out that the last time we had a cryptic tweet from Dr. Serkan Toto, it was a few weeks before last year's 6-month earnings release. But cryptic tweets and what happened last year aside, there is more reason beyond that to expect news for the shareholders meeting. Similar to how Nintendo made the announcement they did back on May 7th about the Switch successor in the June Direct, they're going to need to speak on both short-term and long-term plans here, especially when you take into account how sales are going so far this year. Nintendo is forecasting 13.5 million Switch units sold for this fiscal year, which is a 14% drop from the prior year. They are anticipating less sales. But when taking a look at their first quarterly results for this fiscal year, we're seeing more than a 46% drop. This is significant, and I think this shows that they are not pacing to hit their forecast for the year. And so Nintendo's going to need to answer to that. Depending on how this second quarterly results goes, we may have updated numbers that continue to show that Nintendo is not pacing to hit their forecast for their overall fiscal year, which will only pressure Nintendo more so to speak to both their short-term and long-term plans. And for their short-term plans, what we know so far There really isn't anything there that looks like it's going to help Nintendo really hit their forecast. Sure, Super Mario Party Jamboree has come out, and that's going to do well. But beyond Jamboree, there isn't really any other giant megaton sellers that Nintendo has for this fiscal year. Nintendo recently announced Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, and that's going to close out the fiscal year. That's going to be a nice game, but when you look at the overall sales for the Xenoblade franchise, there really isn't any sort of game that suggests that it would be substantial enough to really bring in the sales to close out the fiscal year. The best-selling Xenoblade game is Xenoblade Chronicles 2 at 2.7 million. Xenoblade Chronicles X, its initial release on Wii U, didn't even sell 1 million copies. Now, I would expect that Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition will do really well. I wouldn't be surprised if it sells above 2 million. I believe in this game that much. A massive open-world RPG, I think it's going to bring in a significant fan base. But even with that optimism in mind, Xenoblade Chronicles X isn't going to be a hardware pusher. It's not going to really do much to get Nintendo close to hitting their forecast, in my opinion. And maybe what's going to happen is that Nintendo will speak to the short term. They will make mention of their recent announcement of Xenoblade Chronicles X. They will make mention of their other interesting announcements as of late, like the playtest program and the recent Nintendo Music app. Do I think any of these things are going to make big differences for Nintendo's overall financials? No. But Nintendo will at least have something to say for the short term. But what about the long term? They might make mention of another movie, but I don't think they're going to be revealing more details about the Mario or Zelda movie. I think updates on those will come a little bit later. The fact that we simply know that they're coming is probably enough for investors. The biggest question right now is what Nintendo's plans are for their next generation. We've heard about Nintendo themselves has already acknowledged it, and we've gone 6 months without any sort of updates. From Nintendo at least. We do know about updates behind the scenes. As pointed out by David Gibson here, an industry analyst, Hosiden has been spending a lot on production equipment, and this seems to suggest that Nintendo is gearing up for mass manufacturing. We've also heard about the manufacturing manifest, how Nintendo has been getting different parts ready. It seems that they are very close to mass production. So we know that Nintendo is gearing up for the Switch 2. But when they're going to reveal it and when it's going to come out are still big questions right now, and they are questions that the shareholders are likely going to want to know about, especially when we're seeing even more declining sales, and Nintendo hasn't done that much to really suggest that they're even going to hit this current forecast, which is already forecasting downward sales. Now, some people may still be doubtful of official news from Nintendo from the shareholders meeting, because if we haven't gotten a reveal by this point, perhaps that suggests that we're far off from the console coming out, especially after the recent announcement of Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition for March. It doesn't seem like Switch 2 is coming out in this fiscal year. It's likely sometime afterwards. But recently, PH Brazil was asked about another potential delay, because PH Brazil did report before anyone else on the internal delay of Switch 2 from earlier this year. The initial plan, supposedly, according to all these different reports, is that Switch 2 was planned for this holiday, and was delayed to sometime next year. Those reports were all suggesting early next year. Now, there's been some flexibility on exactly early next year means. Perhaps March, perhaps April, perhaps May. We're not entirely sure. But PH Brazil was asked about this recently on Family Boards. Paul Brass said, at Brazil, could it be delayed for the second time? And Brazil simply said, nah, no. So according to their sources, up to this point in time, they haven't heard anything to suggest that there is a delay, even though the console has yet to have been revealed. So if this is the case, if Switch 2 is still slated for a first half release of next year, then I would say we absolutely need to get some sort of official word from Nintendo at this shareholders meeting. But of course, officially from Nintendo, we don't know when this console's coming out. We can just make educated guesses based off all the evidence we have seen. And before going forward here, let me just briefly ask that if you've gotten to this point and you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. And so this is what I'm expecting. I'm expecting more than just a retread of what we got 6 months ago. I don't think they're just going to say, we'll be providing more details on the successor to the Nintendo Switch before the end of the fiscal year. That's the worst case scenario in my opinion, and I think it's unlikely. I think we're going to get a little bit more than that. It might not be the reveal trailer or a big direct we've been hoping for, but I do think something is going to happen here. It may be simply them providing a little bit more context in terms of expectation regarding reveal and release. Maybe they will confirm that Switch 2 is coming out in the year 2025. Now this part might seem a little lofty, but hear me out here. What if we do get confirmation on the name of the console? What if they confirm that the console will be called Nintendo Switch 2? What if they show off the logo or something like that? I recognize most people don't think something like this would happen, but considering that we recently got this Yuka Replay trailer where they showed the Nintendo logo and they had the whole eye thing dancing around, we're at a point where some third parties are showing a little bit of restlessness here and having a need to announce that they are making games for this console. And yeah, we skipped Gamescom and there was no announcement. We skipped Tokyo Game Show and there was no announcement. And so maybe they may skip the Game Awards as well. But it might benefit Nintendo to make some sort of official announcement about Switch 2 so we know about the console, the brand at least, maybe just calling it Switch 2. And so at least game companies can start making announcements for their games to be coming to Switch 2, and we could see that at the Game Awards. Even if we don't know how the console looks exactly or all the plans regarding it, if we at least have some sort of name, or at least maybe a code name, maybe it doesn't even have to be an official name, but a code name, that way there can be something in all these different trailers for third-party games showing that they are making games for Switch 2, maybe something like that shows up at the shareholders meeting. Do I want more? Do I hope for more? Absolutely. Am I expecting more? At this point, I'm not so sure. But I do think we're going to get something from Nintendo. They're going to give us a little nugget here, and it's going to be worth talking about in a couple days. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.